Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chabura. We are so excited to be launching our fourth year. It's so nice to see all the new and returning faces, and I hope you all had a relaxing summer break. If you are returning, welcome back. Thank you for your continued support. And for those who are new, welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those who are listening and not yet members, thank you for being here, and we hope you consider joining us and being a part. A little bit about us. The Chabura is an online Bet Midrash comprised of international students offering cutting-edge Torah for you to learn anytime, anywhere. Specifically, we draw inspiration from the classical Sephardi approach and are committed to bringing light to that tradition. The Chabura runs on a membership model, and we offer classes each week from a wide array of Talmidei Chachamim and experts from around the world. While some of the classes are public, many are exclusive and only available for our members. We have a publishing house and put out journals and books covering a wide array of topics. We have live events, Chabura meetups, and our members enjoy access to an international network of members and teachers all committed to Torah and growth. We also have an entire Israel division led by Eli Shaubi with an incredible curriculum in Hebrew. So I highly recommend all to join and not only take advantage of those perks, but also support cutting-edge Torah. You can join through our website at thechabura.com. Today we have with us our Rosh Bet Midrash, Senior Rabbi of the S&P Communities of the UK, Rabbi Joseph Dweck. It's always a privilege and honor when we get to spend time with Rabbi Dweck. Before I hand over the floor, I want to quickly thank all the people that work extremely hard making the Chabura possible. Specifically, I'm not limited to Rabbi Dweck, our dear Sina Kahan, Avi, Eli Shaubi, and many, many more. With that said, thank you all for being here, and Rabbi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rav Ohad. I'm also thrilled that we're starting our fourth year. It's very exciting, and it's been an amazing run so far, and Yhi Ratzon that should only go mechayil el chayil. I told Sina that I was happy to do the opening shiur, and I did not realize that the opening shiur would end up landing on a day that I'm traveling. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, and I'm leaving. I have to get to the airport on time today. So what we're going to do for the opening shiur is I'm going to only be really speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes about the idea of halakha and its place. But ideally, I would want to give a different kind of shiur than the one that I'll be giving tonight or today. Right now, it's morning for me, actually. It's noon, not morning. So what I'm going to do is, in order to be able to at least, be with you and open the year appropriately, I'm going to open the ideas, right? I'm going to kind of share some kind of general thoughts with regards to this, this question of halakha and mitzvah and its place, specifically with regard to the berit. But then I hope to revisit this in a more substantial shiur later in the, maybe a month or two from now. We'll see how it is that it works with the curriculum. So I just wanted to be able to mention that at the beginning. Unfortunately, because of the pressing of time and in general, time for me has been terribly pressed lately. So I'd at least be able to have this time with you and to begin opening these thoughts. So let's get into it. I think that it's important to recognize that the question of halakha and its relationship to mitzvah, and specifically its relationship to the berit, right, to the covenant. So one thing that I've shared fairly often, both in the Chabura and anywhere that I'm teaching, is how fundamental and central the concept of berit is to Israel, and it's actually quite unique to Israel, right? Because the concept of berit itself is essentially that Hakadosh Baruch Hu agreed and indeed even offered, certainly when it comes to Avraham Avinu and to us for that matter, a partnership. That's really what the idea of covenant is. It's a partnership. It is a commitment to the other party, right? So with regards to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, it's Hakadosh Baruch Hu and Avraham and Avraham's children, right, from the line of Yitzhak, and from our perspective, it's our relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. But there is no other real claim outside of Israel and Jewish people with regards to Brit. There are, situations in which, people claim that God says, if you do this and this, then you'll have salvation. But that's basically of a promise, It's not this mutual invested relationship that spans across time, that there is a role for both parties to play in a mutual endeavor. And that very much is the nature of the relationship between Hakadosh Baruch Hu, between God and Israel. So it starts with Avraham Avinu, and Avraham Avinu, as I've pointed out many times, the essence of the Brit is not related to law. It's actually unconditional, right? It is simply that Hakadosh Baruch Hu loves Avraham, loves the entirety of Avraham, right? He doesn't have an agenda with Avraham. There is not a specific issue with Avraham that he's looking for per se. He falls in love with Avraham, and he offers a brit. Avraham readily and happily accepts this brit, in which Hakadosh Baruch Hu basically says, you do brit milah, and that will be the sign between me and your children, and I will support them and take care of them, and you will commit your lives to me in terms of your consciousness and your belief system, and ultimately what it is that you do with regards to your life, which is broadly outlined by Hakadosh Baruch Hu, is tzedakah mishpat, right? You'll live a life of righteousness and justice, and through that connect to me. And the basis for this is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides territory, right? Provides a physical land in which Avraham Avinu's family can flourish, which is Eretz Israel, and commits to being able to take care of them and protect them throughout history. Now, like I've said, there's times where there's the small print with regards to this brit, and where Hakadosh Baruch Hu will adhere very, very specifically to the technical parts of it, and where he says, for example, to Moshe Rabbeinu twice, not once but twice, I'm going to wipe all of the people out and remain with you. And that is obviously a very, very strict reading of the terms of the Brit, because that's essentially saying, look, Moshe, you are a descendant of Abraham. I will not be wiping away the descendants of Abraham, but this particular cohort I'm not going to deal with. And I'm ready to wipe the cohort out. And I'll continue with you. I'll start with you. I'll make a great nation, from you. So, there's both sides of it. Yeah, there's both sides of it. There are times where HaKadosh Baruch Hu certainly is committed to the Brit, but there's also times where it seems ostensibly that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is prepared to have a very, very strict technical reading of the Brit, given the adherence to it, right? So there is leeway with regards to that. But again, the more important thing for our purposes is that it is a Brit that is not necessarily associated with law in any way. It is a Brit that is associated with the person and the people. So if there is a connection between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the children of Avraham Avinu, it is essentially in that they are the children of Avraham Avinu, and that's it. And that's enough as far as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is concerned. And that really is the very base of our people. And it's very important for us to know. And so when we open an Amidah, for example, we open our dialogue, which essentially is opening our dialogue with God. Whenever it is that we're standing and praying to God, which means that we are essentially standing before his presence, his Shekhinah, as we would call it, and speaking to him of our needs and our wants and our awareness and consciousness in this world and so on. We always begin it immediately. I mean, the first words that we say is Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. The first beracha is Magen Avraham. So there is nothing that we do as a people, there's nothing, in terms of the nature of our people, that is not fundamentally rooted and based on that foundation. And that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's brit with Abraham. But there is another level of berit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu enters into with Abraham's children. And that happens at Sinai, right? That happens at Har Sinai. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers a second level of brit. And he offers this brit to the national entity, right? He offers the brit to the family of Abraham, rather than just the individual Abraham or the individual Yitzhak or the individual Yaakov, where it's simply the brit of Abraham is reaffirmed. Here there's something new. And this brit at Sinai, interestingly, is entirely based and rooted in commandment, right? In mitzvah. And then ultimately, that means that it's rooted in law, which we will we will understand, or we'll touch on in a moment. So what is that, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, even when he hires Moshe originally, right, when he charges Moshe to be a savior and to bring the people out of Egypt, he says, I'm doing this to fulfill my covenant with Abraham. There is absolutely no mention whatsoever, not to Abraham, not to Yitzhak, not to Yaakov, or to Moshe, for that matter, about a Torah or a set of commandments that he's going to command them. There's no mention of that whatsoever in the initial stages. All of this, right? Everything that we read practically up until Mount Sinai is a fulfilling of the Brit with Abraham Avinu. Now, the truth is, like I say, everything is a fulfillment of the Brit with Abraham Avinu, the Torah included. But from the fact that the Torah is not mentioned originally tells us very certainly that the Torah is not the end. In other words, the ends of this Brit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with Abraham Avinu is not so that the people should keep Torah. It is rather so that the people should have relationship with God. Now, what the Torah does is provide for us a framework, and for that matter, behaviors through which we can gain connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so the brit that is offered at Sinai to the people is very much mitzvah oriented. Right? It is essentially V'haya im shamoa tishmeu mitzvotai, right? Which Moshe then later talks about in Devarim. But for all intents and purposes, the offering at Sinai of covenant is a covenant in which we don't only accept the relationship with God, but we accept that the mode in which we will maintain relationship with God in an active way is through his commandments. And that is unique with regards to Har Sinai, right? So the mitzvot are essentially presented to us as mechanisms to engage with God. Now, it's important to understand why that's the case, right? Why does that need to be the case? Why can it not simply suffice with what it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu established with Avraham Avinu and, was kept for however many hundred years until Sinai, right? What's the need for the mitzvah? The need for mitzvah is explained essentially by Harambam at the opening of Hilchot Avodah Zarah. And the fact that he opens Hilchot Avodah Zarah with this is telling, because it has everything to do with Avodah Zarah. And what is Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah is essentially serving the wrong God. That's literally what Avodah Zarah is, right? Avodah Zarah is strange Avodah, right? It is not appropriate Avodah. So it is serving another deity. Now, there are hardcore elements of Avodah Zarah, right? And that is something that, by the way, is very central to Avraham Avinu, right? In other words, one of the elements of tradition that we have with Abraham is that what is Abraham's entire life dedicated to? It's dedicated to knowing the one true God. And it's dedicated to alleviating or cutting away or recognizing and removing anything that is not that one true God. Right, so the Hachamim say, for example, that Avraham Avinu had 400 chapters to his Masechet Avodah Zarah. Right, the reality is he probably didn't have a Masechet Avodah Zarah, but that's a way of saying that Avraham spent his entire time in identifying and recognizing what is not service to God. And what I also point out fairly often is that it's important for us to recognize that when Avraham Avinu does speak to God and does recognize God and does have this engaging relationship with God, he does not create a religion. He does not say, okay, now that we know the one true God, we must worship him. We must serve him. He says nothing of the sort. He says we must know him, and he teaches people about him, but he does not offer service to God. And it's very important to understand why. Because if Abraham were to do that, he would simply be doing what everyone else did in terms of Avodah Zarah, and that would be that he would be essentially serving God, even if it was the true God, in a way that was not mandated. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem essentially because we have no way of knowing what it is that can genuinely connect us with God. And the reason for that is also fairly simple, and that is because God has no connection or existentially to human beings, right? God is the first thing from a human being. And being that that's the case, we, being human beings, only can think like human beings and only relate as human beings relate. And so even when we want to relate to another human being, right, we know it's not the easiest thing in the world, right? Trying to find a path to become intimately connected with another human being, whoever that may be, is fraught with challenges. Yeah, how do I know what I think, what I feel, what I experience, what I want, what I know is the way that this other human being is going to want and need and think and know and so on and so forth. And so it takes me time to be able to learn about the other human being. Now, I'm much closer to that because I can then, empathize. I can extrapolate my own feelings. I can hear what that other human being is saying. And even if I don't relate, I can begin to consider what it might be like for me to be able to feel those things. And that is the stuff of human relationships. But I can't do that at all with God. And we tend to forget that we are always anthropomorphizing God, right? We are always making God human, right? So we will think, how do I wish to relate to God? What does God think of me? How does God relate to me? And normally the way that we think is the way that we think other human beings would relate to me, given my particular experience. I mean, it doesn't even relate to other human beings. How many times do we think one human being thinks X about us? And we're wrong about that, right? These are just assumptions. To do that with God is a non-starter from the get-go, right? It is a terrible problem. And that means that there is, for all intents and purposes, if we are honest, an unbridgeable gap. I'm going to repeat, an unbridgeable gap between us and God. How do we find that bridge? Now, left to our own devices, that bridge is essentially non-discoverable because we have no tactics or tools whatsoever to be able to contemplate or actually hypothesize what might be the thing that connects us. The only way we can possibly know what it is that connects us is for God to tell us. And that is why prophecy, and specifically the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, these are 2 points, right? It's prophecy in and of itself, and then the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, is included in Harambam's 13 articles of faith. Right? Harambam's 13 articles of faith are posited by Harambam because he sees that without these 13 articles, the entire edifice of the Jewish faith falls apart. And if you miss one of them, you miss all of them. So prophecy is included because it says that we recognize that it is an imperative that God communicate with humans. Okay, now, again, one can believe whatever, one believes, but ultimately, if we're going to have a functioning system, it's required. If we take God seriously, as we know him, or as we do, right? So, in order for us to be able to connect with God, we need for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to tell us how it is that we connect. And that is what a mitzvah is. Right? So the commandments are commandments, not because God simply wants us to obey. The commandments are not commandments simply because God wants us to create a just society, although Harambam says this. But it's not the only thing that he says, right? Like I'm telling you, he presents all of this in the opening of Hilchot Avodah Zarah. Ultimately, a mitzvah is for us to be able to connect with God. And it tells us how we can. So every single mitzvah is able to build relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because without them, we have no way of knowing how to connect. Okay, so that's the base. So in this presentation at Sinai, it is a presentation of a bridge that otherwise is inaccessible. Because the only way that Abraham knew God was essentially through his experience of God, and at whatever points God spoke to him, which are not many, if you read, the story of Abraham's life. But as Harambam points out at the end of Hilchot Avodah Zarah, he says, look, Avodah Zarah is a problem. We will always be at risk of falling into it. And therefore, me'ahavat Adonai otanu u'mishvuato shenishba la'Avraham Avinu, because of God's love for us as the children of Abraham, and the oath that he made to Avraham Avinu, asa Moshe Rabbeinu, he created Moshe, Ushlacho kedei lehodiam derech avodato, so that he could come and give over to the people the way in which to serve. And that saves us from Avodah Zarah, and it connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, when we understand that the law is essential. Why? Because there's a difference between simply being, the children by default of Avraham Avinu, and therefore, recognizing that, as Yosef Yerushalmi said when he was at Harvard, even if there is, I don't know that it was original, that he was the first one to say this, but he said it. And my friend Mark Helprin studied with him there and studied from him there, learned from him there, and he quoted him as saying this, that even as there is only one Jew left in the world, God is not forsaken. And that's true, right? In other words, the brit with Avraham Avinu is technically kept as long as one Jew is kept alive. Now, it may not be the robust expression of that covenant, and it may be a very unfortunate expression of that covenant, but it is, like I said, technically a fulfillment of that covenant. The question is, if the goal is to be able to maintain a family and ultimately to maintain a national family, right? A family that can manifest itself as a member, as it were, of the family of nations, as we call it, right? Which is today and most often in history quite estranged from the rest of the family of nations, otherwise known in Hebrew as the Goyim, right? We are a Goy amongst the Goyim. There needs to be critical mass, right? You need to have a certain, number of people. It's just the way that it functions in the human realm. And so in order to be able to ensure that, mitzvot are given. And as Moshe Rabbeinu says many times, certainly at the beginning of Devarim, he says these mitzvot are given to you litov lach, for your good. Because in these commandments, they will not only provide for you connection to God, they will provide for you life as a people in your connecting with God through them. All right, so that is not a promise to individuals like you and me. That is a promise to the entity, right? Which is, it has its own kind of identity. So when you talk about the American people, right, for example, well, who are the American people? Well, the American people that were the American people at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence are no longer around, are they? And yet, the current cohort recognizes almost without question that they must uphold the Declaration and must uphold the Constitution and must uphold the system of government that was established over 2 centuries ago by a bunch of people that nobody knows or have any connection with. So that is an idea, right? It is an idea and a structure of people, right? Not just the idea itself, that perpetuates through history as long as it survives. And what essentially HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Avraham is, I want to be able to provide for your family an opportunity not only to survive, but to be able to live and thrive across history with me. And in order for them to be able to connect, they need, that means, a mode in which they can connect with me. I'm going to give them these mitzvot because those are the pathways in which they can actually connect. And not just connect, but through that, maintain perpetuation in life as a people. Now, if you think about it, right, the mitzvot in no small part have actually served that for us. Because the reality is that the great majority of Jewish people in the world today, right, barring converts, but even the converts, for them to have a people within which to convert, right, to become part, the vast majority of Jewish people today can trace back at least, and probably at the most 6 generations, with every generation, the number, gets bigger, observant ancestors. Because the reality is that those who have not kept observance of the mitzvot end up dying out within 2 to 3 generations. Maybe more, but not much. So the mitzvot have very much been the the uh, the scaffolding that holds the people and that allows for that matter, and I'm using this word knowingly, right, consciously, yeah, that allows for God to connect with us. What does that mean, right? So if we recognize a real existential connection between what God is and what we are, God also is not riding in a people that, for all intents and purposes, are not fit for him. What do we mean not fit for him? I don't just mean, in a respect term, right? In the term of kind of honor and respect. It's not. I'm just talking about it also in existential terms. Right, and that's why so much of the work of Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai, if you pay close attention, is negotiating God in to the people, even when they are not really quite fit for God to reside with them. One of the things that Moses negotiates with God during the golden calf episode is that God should walk with us in our impurities. Right? God saying, look, I'm not shutting down the covenant and I'm going to bring them into the land like I told Abraham, but I don't want to travel with these people. I don't want to spend any time with them. I'll see them when they make it, whenever it is that they make it. I'll ensure that they do make it, but otherwise I'm not interested in having. And what does Moshe do? Moshe says, look, im en panecha holechim, al ta'alenu mizeh. Halo belechtecha imanu. You need to walk with us. If you're not going to walk with us, then don't take us out of here. So God says, okay, fine, I'll walk with you. And he has to bring in Yom Kippur in order to be able to cleanse the people. So that's a functional agreement. He establishes the Mishkan and all kinds of korbanot in order to be able to do kapara and atonement. The whole concept of kapara itself is brought in. Again, atonement, right? The cleansing, the atoning for whatever it is, the iniquities and so on are brought in order for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to maintain residence within the people. And the response to Moshe Rabbeinu's entire tefillah ultimately is residence, right? It's a Mishkan. God builds a flat, right? A tent for all intents and purposes to live with the people. So that's all of this. And ultimately, what the mitzvot are meant to do, if they are kept faithfully, is to create a people that are of the appropriate existential state to be able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it does both. So when Harambam says keeping the mitzvot creates a just society, that is not an end in and of itself. The just society becomes a fit base for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to manifest. Right? If it's not a just society, then it's a broken society. There's no room for God to be able to manifest. Why would God be in such a place or in such a state? And the only reason that there's any connection to God at all with such a people is because of Abraham. So the goal of Sinai is to be able to have HaKadosh Baruch Hu engage with the people, qua the people, as a family, as a national family. And that is why mitzvah becomes so important. Because if we want to be able to engage with God actively, to be able to actually have a dynamic running relationship with God, the mitzvot are essential. We cannot do that without the mitzvot. What are we left to? We're left to, my God doesn't need me to. Well, that's your God, right? That is not the God. That's how you feel about God, which has everything to do with you creating a God, not what God actually is. And so Torah presents to us through the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, again, that is our belief, through the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, this is the way that you connect with me. And that's why it's related to Avodah Zarah, right? If I do things for the right God, quote unquote, without God having commanded those things to me, it is in the family of Avodah Zarah, even though we might not kill the person, or we might not, he might not be culpable in the same way as actually worshiping an idol or, some other deity, is because ultimately what you're doing when you do that, right? When you act in service not mandated by God, is to essentially say, I'm creating my own God, because even though God didn't tell me this, I believe that God would like this. Okay, so then that's essentially a God of your own creation in significant terms. So when we recognize the central nature of mitzvah with regards to that, and that the mitzvah ultimately is that the offering of the bridge to be able to bridge from humanity to deity, right? then we recognize also that the technical elements of the mitzvah are important. How do I know when I fulfill the mitzvah? So every mitzvah has legal components to it. Every mitzvah has legal components. And the legal components are the elements that tell me that I'm within bounds of the commandment. And we call it halakha because it's essentially the road that we walk upon our lives together with God. How do I know that I'm on the road? Halakha is what defines what the boundaries of the road are. It is the guide to the walk. How do I know that I'm still on the path? Halakha is how you know that you're still on the path. It's the only way to know. What are the official definitions of this particular mitzvah? Now, the interesting thing is that once the concept of the mitzvah is given, covenant mandates that we have a say in how it is that mitzvah is applied in our times. And that all of this that I'm telling you now is essentially the Parashat HaShavua. All right, it's all Shofetim v'Shoterim. All of that is presented in the Torah's presentation of the governmental system. The governmental system essentially is predicated on the idea that mitzvahs are the mode of our connection because it's relying on the idea that our entire raison d'etre is covenant with God, this mutual endeavor that we engage with God in this life as a people in relationship with Him, and the mitzvah is my bridge. And in order to be able to know the guidelines of a mitzvah, I need to have the legal definitions of that mitzvah. And the legal definitions are essentially determined by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is empowered then. In the same way, again, lehavdila levavdalot. Look, the Constitution is essentially established. Nobody takes away the Constitution of the United States. And I'm in LA, so I'm talking American now, right? But nobody takes away the Constitution of the United States. They can amend the Constitution of the United States, right? Now that we don't do with the written Torah because we recognize it as being divine. We don't amend the written text of the Torah, but we certainly have, in principle, the authority to be able to define legally how the concepts of those mitzvot should be applied. And the Supreme Court has the authority to do that, and that's expressed in this week's parasha. It's by mandate of Torah itself they have this allowance. The reason why halakha is important is because halakha tells us, it guides us and says, this is the manner in which you perform this and know that you are still within bounds of the path of the Brit. So that is the general approach. Now, what I'd like to do in a future shiur is to understand more. How is it that halakha does that? What happens with halakha when it is, not responsive? When we're stuck with, books upon books upon books that set law in, almost in petrification, and we don't have the ability to be able to deal with it in certain ways, and sometimes we don't have the courage to deal with it in certain ways. How does galut relate to this? Obviously, I mean, if it has to do with living on the land and being a family and a national manifestation of a family on this land, right, that has everything to do with the halakha and the mitzvah and so on and so forth. So we need to unpack all of that, and I aim, please God, to unpack that at a later date. But what I've done in this shiur is to give the broad frame of what mitzvah is meant to be, and ultimately how halakha manifests with regards to mitzvah, right? But there is a difference between mitzvah and halakha. Mitzvah is not synonymous. Or the language of Harambam, he doesn't talk about halakha, he talks about din, right? So he says there's a mitzvah, and then there's the dinim of the mitzvah, right? The judgments of the mitzvah, right? How this mitzvah manifests. What are the particular definitions of this mitzvah? So when the Torah says that you are to deprive your souls on the day of Yom Kippur, what doesn't say anything more than that? What is that deprivation? We have to determine what the deprivation is. It also doesn't say anything, for example, that it means that it manifests only for 13-year-olds and up, which is why the Karaites have babies fasting on Yom Kippur. All of these things we need to be able to understand further, but I wanted to be able to present how, first of all, mitzvah relates to the covenant itself. It's very important to understand that, and why Sinai is so essential with regards to that. And ultimately, how is it halakha, the walking, right? The way, recognizing the boundaries of the way and how we walk it. are connected to that. So please God, we'll have a proper shiur where I can present sources and I have better time to be able to unpack all of it, and we will do that together. But otherwise, it is an honor and pleasure to start the fourth year with everyone, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll carry this further soon enough.
Thank you so much, Chacham. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We're excited to start the year together.
So Hashem,
Bye
forgive
bye.
me for having to step away. I wish everyone well.
ראש חודש טוב.
Chodesh Tov.
Good night, everyone.